Good evening, good evening, and welcome to Any Given Sunday. This is your host, Coach 24, Darwin Penny. We'll be joined shortly by my co-host who is traveling, the awesome voice, Mr. Brian Kress. Always thankful for our host, Mr. George Walker, DJ Scatter. And Any Given Sunday, nothing like it. We were a witness to Any Given Sunday in week one of our NFL season. We want to talk a little bit about our week one NFL season. We'll also hit a little bit on baseball as well with Aaron Judge and his continued assault on certainly not the Major League Baseball home run record, but certainly the New York Yankees hallowed record of 61 set by Roger Maris, and also the 60 from Babe Ruth. And then we'll also look at honoring Roberto Clemente. The Clemente Award is this week, and so we want to just sit back and take some time to look at baseball and how it's always given back to its community. The late, great Roberto Clemente, and how he gave the ultimate sacrifice in giving his life while trying to have supplies to country in Nicaragua. And then we'll talk a little bit also about the impact of England and the Queen of England. And we lost her. I know it's not sports related, but England is certainly very important to our sports world when we look globally at soccer and we look at the Olympics. So with that said, we're going to look at this past week and the NFL season. Who would have predicted we would have had such a great first week of the NFL? When you look at the number of games that were one-score games, that's why we look forward to it Any Given Sunday. We had a one-score game. We had multiple one-score games. We had tie ball games. And so it was just an exciting weekend, certainly for Chiefs fans. We're going to hit on it as the Chiefs are home tonight hosting the San Diego Chargers, and we are excited about having our co-host joining us via phone conversation. Brian, are you there?
I am here, Mr. 24, Coach 24. How are you doing, sir?
Doing well. Let's look at I'm glad you're safe out there. Hopefully you're not using up all of that money out there in Vegas and enjoying some of the other things that go along in Vegas. But yep. I will tell you to do this. What goes on in Vegas stays in Vegas.
Right. Right now, the money is staying with me right now. Now, I've still got a few more days, so we won't know, but right now I'm good.
All right. Well, let's talk a little bit about week one. Talk about some of our surprises, some of our expectations, some of our lows. When we look at it, we had eight games that were decided by 9 games that were decided by one score or less. I think probably the one that was probably the most intriguing was the Steelers and the Bengals game. 23-20 in overtime. The Steelers, by most accounts, the Bengals should not have been in the game because they had 5 turnovers in that game. Normally, if you lose the turnover war by 5, you are usually getting it handed to you. But yet and still, all they had to do was have a made point after try with no time remaining, and could have easily secured that game.
Absolutely. Well, we talked a couple of weeks ago with Louisiana State University, LSU, and Florida State, how a missed extra point or a missed field goal was caused by allowing an inside guy to come in and block it. Well, guess what? It happens in the professional league, obviously, too, because I'll tell you what, the Cincinnati coach, the special teams coach, should be ripping that player for allowing Fitzpatrick to get in and block that extra point. And you are right. And we both predicted Cincinnati to win, but I really thought Pittsburgh was going to win. And here was the one reason. Mike Tomlin. And Mike Tomlin proved that he is still a phenomenal coach. Now, if you realize, they got 5 turnovers, but they lost their best defensive player in T.J. Watt roughly in the third quarter. So they played without their best defensive player for a third of the game, and yet they still came out on top.
Yeah, it was. It's a basic fundamental that we talked about when it comes to the wing man or the end man just above the guy on the line of scrimmage. He's actually the end man that's in the backfield. For those who understand the rules of football, there has to be 7 guys on the line of scrimmage, and there's got to be 4 guys in the backfield. So when you line up for a point after try, obviously the kicker and the holder are easily detected as being in the backfield. When you look at either end of the line of scrimmage, you'll usually have a wingman. One of the things that you always teach the wingman is always protect inside over the outside threat, because the outside guy has a farther distance to travel to block it. The other thing of note was that Cincinnati's long snapper was injured during that time, and so they had a backup long snapper who is a third string tight end who had never snapped in an NFL game before, and he had to snap it. And so the snap was a little bit slow and on the previous field goal attempt, and it was also a little bit low and inside on the point after try, which gave Minkah Fitzpatrick all the time that he needed, certainly slipping inside the wingman to block that extra point. But for those who think that it doesn't matter, special teams matter.
Oh yeah, absolutely. If anybody who has been ever involved with football, whether it's Pee Wee or the top of the professional level, you know that the special teams is sometimes more important than the offense and defense. And if you think about it, the long snapper on the field goal in overtime was a little high, and and then by the time the holder grabbed the ball and turned it, the laces were out. Remember, Ace Ventura, anybody, laces out, and he kicked it with laces out and kicked a horrible kick. But all that stuff they practice that day after day after day. And if you lose one of those important cogs, it really matters. And that game showed you just how important every aspect of the game is.
Absolutely. But I want to ask any of the kickers out there, do they ever practice kicking with the laces facing you so you wouldn't panic so much when you actually see it? So, but yeah, it's a great thing. So when you look at that game, it was a one-score game. We look at the Falcons and Saints was a one-score game. The Browns and Panthers. Really, the Bears and 49ers was a 9-point game, but it was a one-score game for a long time. The Eagles and the Lions was a 3-point game. The Colts and the Texans actually had a tie. Can't believe that because it doesn't happen in the NFL too often. And then the Commanders and the Jaguars, the Giants and the Titans was a one-score game, 1-point game. And then the Raiders, Chargers were also a one-score game. So, and then our Monday night game with Russell Wilson traveling back to Seattle, where he has spent his entire career, won a Super Bowl, was participated in another Super Bowl there, and certainly was the first of the franchise there for a long time in Cincinnati. What were your thoughts on Monday night's game?
Well, here was the thing. It was a great game. You know, Pete Carroll, and what I did not realize was the animosity between Russell Wilson and Pete Carroll. I thought they had a decent relationship, and come to find out when that game happened that they really had animosity between each other. So Pete Carroll really wanted to beat him. But it was a great game. It was a challenging game. But here's my thing, and I'm going to give it back to you. How does a coach prepare to make a drive to kick a 64-yard field goal. Now, it was 4th and 5, and last year on 4th and 5, when people made it, they made it 48% of the time. How rare is it to kick a 64-yard field goal? It was. I could not understand why he was preparing his team for a 64-yard field goal. And after that, how much of a locker room could it damage after that decision, and especially his recourse afterwards in a press conference?
As far as I saw it, it was poor clock management. You still had timeouts, even up 4th and 5. Even if you decide to kick it, you could have had an opportunity just to sit down and call a timeout. Let's look at what play we may have. What's our best 4th and 5? Could we put the ball in the hands of our quarterback? What signal does that send to your quarterback? What messaging is that to him that says on 4th and 5, I don't trust you. I trust a kicker trying to kick it from 64 yards. Now, we do know that kickers have made it from that distance in the past, and the guy actually put a pretty decent foot into it, but it was just the poor clock management. There was more than 40 plus seconds before they allowed the clock to get all the way down to 25. So he said in one of his press conferences that he had always said that to Russell Wilson, that if in any kind of way they didn't get the first down on 3rd down, that they were going to kick it, because they felt like the kicker had some success earlier in preparing for the game at pregame. Every coach goes out in pregame and wants to see, and he asks his kicker, how good are you? What's your number going this way, and what's your number going the other way? Depending on what that wind is, where do you feel comfortable? And I don't know if the guy told him he felt comfortable there, but it was his first NFL game as a head coach, Hackett. And at the end of the day, it was poor clock management. And then I think he's going to have to really work to gain the trust of his quarterback, who feels like, you don't trust me by putting the ball in my hand. And we're not talking about a rookie quarterback. We're talking about a quarterback that's been in the league for over a decade, a Super Bowl winning quarterback. And at the end of the day, that's the same issue that he was trying to leave, as you alluded to. The tension between he and Pete Carroll became because at the end of the day, you didn't allow Russ to cook and allow him to have more input in the game planning and the things that they were doing, especially when you become a veteran quarterback and have had the type of success that Russell Wilson has had in his career.
Right, and true. And you just signed Wilson to a $245 million contract. Now, I'm going to compare this to the Chiefs. We've got a really good kicker who could possibly kick a 64-yard field goal, but we have Patrick Mahomes, who's a $500 million man. I would put the hands in my $500 million man than into the foot of a kicker. And if you're paying Russell Wilson all this money, then you need to put it in his hands to win it or lose it. And they did not do that. And like I think that it really hurt Denver's locker room a little bit. It has to damage it. I know it's the first game of the year. I know it's only this is overreaction, but still, this was a game that the Broncos could have had, and they just totally blew it. And that happens with Nathaniel Hackett, because Andy Reid, as great as a coach as he was, he had that same reputation of clock management failures and not winning the big games.
Absolutely. It's going to be one of those things that I think is going to come back and haunt them. They're already in a difficult division, the Broncos, and so going down a game when you possibly didn't have to certainly is not going to help. Let's talk about certainly the Chiefs look really, really good against the Cardinals. Patrick Mahomes picked up basically where he left off. There was a lot of conversation going into the game about what would the Chiefs offense look like without Tyreek Hill, and would he find the trust of the other receivers? And we saw that he was able to spread the ball around and then still hit who I always believe is his number one target, which is Travis Kelce, and he had a big day as well. And so, give me your thoughts about the Chiefs' the first week.
Well, I'll tell you what, Chiefs were very impressive on the offense, and they were very impressive on the defense. Saying that, based on overreaction week, Arizona was hurting offensively and defensively. They did not have their star defensive players. They did not have their star offensive players. And that could have been a matter. Saying that, it is a professional game, and it doesn't matter. Harrison Butker got hurt. They had to bring in somebody to kick it. Thank goodness Justin Reed showed up just enough to help out. But now Harrison Butker is not playing tonight because of the ankle. And tonight will really show just how good the Chiefs are, because they are playing a much better team. They're playing a fully loaded team outside of Keenan Allen not being there. The Chargers are loaded up, and Herbert, if they beat the Chiefs tonight, will be the first quarterback to beat Patrick Mahomes at Arrowhead with his second victory. So this game will really matter. I think it's going to be a really good game, and that will dictate. But saying that, the Chiefs are still the team to beat and to make it to the Super Bowl.
Absolutely. I think they are the team to beat, but that gap has certainly closed. I think with the Buffalo Bills, and Buffalo was very, very impressive in their opening night win over the defending Super Bowl champion Rams. I would agree with your assessment of the Chiefs and having to send a message to the Chargers that we are still not only the class of the division, but certainly the class of the AFC as a whole. With that being said, the Chargers are coming in here with something to prove. They're a team that's on the upswing. They felt like last year they were missing a few key components defensively, certainly with Bosa being out last year, and he's going to be a huge part at being able to pressure Mahomes, certainly from the outside, because you do not want him to get out of the pocket. You want him to have to step up in the pocket, but he's so elusive in the pocket, and he can make throws from many, many different angles. I think the key for the Chargers' victory is being able to manage the clock a little bit, being able to find them some semblance of a running game. The Chiefs did find them some semblance of a running game last week, and so I think whoever establishes that and whoever wins the turnover game certainly will play a huge part in that. With that saying, I'm going to certainly be going with the home team, the Chiefs playing at Arrowhead.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is going to be a great game, and out here, and for everybody who doesn't know, I am in Las Vegas, hanging out with friends and enjoying some vacation time. There are a lot of Chiefs fans that are out here wanting to cheer for the Chiefs and everything else, which is really, really cool. Saying that this is their chance to show the world that they are still the world beaters. And I made a couple of bets since I was out here. I did bet the Chiefs and the 4 points, and then I bet the over 54, because I do think it's going to be a high-scoring game. Yeah, the Chargers' defense is really good and shut down the Raiders, but the Raiders' offense, to be honest, is not as good as the Chiefs. And so this will be a very good matchup. It's still early in the season, and early in the season, usually the offense is a lot more polished than the defense. So we will see that tonight.
All right. With that said, next thing I'm going to go to is, what was your surprise win or surprise loss in week one?
My surprise game of the weekend was the Tennessee Titans blowing a 13-point lead against the Giants. The Giants were arguably one of the worst 2 or 3 teams in the league, and Tennessee was the defending number 1 seed in the AFC. And they looked like they were playing really good for a while, and then all of a sudden they just fell apart. I was impressed with the Giants just as much as I was disappointed in how Tennessee let the Giants come back and beat them. I'm not sure I'm not sure if Tennessee, at this pace, could even make the playoffs based on this. This is still overreaction, but if you're going to allow one of the worst teams in the league, yes, and they are professionals, and as our show says, any given Sunday, but if you can let the Giants come in and just dominate you in the second half, and you guys are already playing behind the 8 ball, it doesn't fare well unless they totally get it in gear. Mike Vrabel is a good coach not to let this happen. And in comparison, you got Mike Tomlin at Pittsburgh. Mike Tomlin would have never let that happen.
Mm-hmm. And I'm going to come back to coaches a little bit later, but I do want to highlight the fact of the re-emergence of Saquon Barkley. Saquon Barkley has been really banged up the last 2 years, and Saquon was able to have 18 carries and 164 yards and a touchdown, and then also played a huge part in what they were able to do in the passing game with 6. He had 6 receptions as well. And so I think at the end of the day, what Tennessee couldn't do is put the game away, even despite the fact that Daniel Jones did what he always does, and he turned the ball over. But he was really, really efficient in he only had 188 yards passing, but he was 17 out of 21. And so that means that he only missed on 4 passes, which one of those passes was to the other team. So some people would say he really didn't miss. He actually hit the other team right in the hands. And so,
right.
But, they had a very, very conservative game plan. They were able to keep the game real low scoring, keep it to a 1-score game. And that's how you steal a game when you are a team that's in the bottom division, not only in your division, but in the whole league. Let's just keep it close and give ourselves a chance at the end. And then certainly they were able to keep Derrick Henry bottled up. He had 21 carries for 82 yards. And, Tannehill had 266 yards passing, but he was only 20 out of 33. And so they were still trying to find themselves. And then who's going to be Tennessee's big explosive playmaker for them in the passing game? And I think that's going to be something that in your earlier assessment, talking about Tennessee going backwards this year, I think that's going to be huge. Are they wondering that they let go of Julio a little too soon? Because when we saw Julio on Sunday night, Julio looked almost like Julio of old. He was moving very, very well, and they don't have a home run hitter in that Tennessee arsenal of receivers. And so they're going to have to rely on Derrick Henry grinding it out, which is going to put them in a position where they won't have very many high-scoring games. And will that defense be able to hold up? As a defense, you think, man, we hold them to 21 points. You like to think that your offense can get you a little bit more than that, especially when you're able to play action off of Derrick Henry and what he's able to do.
Well, absolutely. But here's what the problem would be for the Tennessee defense is if the Tennessee offense doesn't provide points or provide long-standing drives and makes the defense play 35, 40 minutes on the field, whereas the offense is only 20, 25 minutes. That will wear them down fast, and any great defense will struggle with that. So that offenses need to pick it up, and losing A.J. Brown hurts them a lot more than people expected.
Absolutely, I think that's huge. Again, I'll say that Julio looked more like Julio. The other thing is the defense had 5 sacks of Daniel Jones. So the defense did more than enough, but their offense is certainly going to have to come to play. I think my big surprise game of the week, more than anything else, was the lackluster performance of my beloved Dallas Cowboys. I mean, it was after the first drive, it was all downhill after that. There was no continuity between the receivers and Dak. He was either behind on throws or they were dropping throws. They had some semblance of running game. Ezekiel was getting 5 yards a pop, but he only got 10 carries. And so the other thing that I shared with some friends of mine when it comes to Dallas and their passing game is that they're going to have to keep Ezekiel in because Tony Pollard is not very good in pass protection. He gave up 1 sack, and certainly the ball that Dak threw where he broke his thumb, he did not step up to pick up that blitz well either because the guy pushed him right into it. And so I think that was one of the things that, not guys not playing in the preseason anymore. With only 2 games, you go into the first game where these offenses are not where they should be. And especially when you've got a whole new arsenal of receivers. And, if CeeDee Lamb's going to step up and be number one, he's got to be able to step up and be number one. So for me, that was my disappointing game of the week.
Oh, absolutely. And, they didn't play well. And then you lose your quarterback for up to 8 weeks. And you have Cooper Rush coming into play. Yes, he won 1 game last year for them against Minnesota, but that was 1 game. He's not going to come in week after week. And you're playing a Cincinnati team this week who just got beat at home against the Pittsburgh Steelers, so they are not happy themselves. And they are definitely going to look to rebound from that loss. Saying that, what now? McCarthy has already been on the hot seat, and has been favored to get fired. What does this do? What does this do to him now losing Dak Prescott?
Well, one of the things is he was struggling when he had things in his control. Now with injuries, he's got things that are out of control. He's got inexperience playing at the tackles. Got a first-time starter at left guard. Your quarterback's out, and so McCarthy is definitely going to be on the hot seat. I've always said that if he doesn't win this year and he doesn't get beyond the first round, I think he's out anyway. I think Jerry will easily pay that money off, and if he could get Sean Payton, who's out there and who would be available and who still has a home in Dallas, and so could they be able to do that? The only halfway bright spot in the Cowboys game was again our second-year player Micah Parsons. Micah Parsons was dominant again, and was able to get 2 sacks and countless numbers of pressures and tackles during that game. And the defense held up at 19 points. If you could hold Tampa Bay and Tom Brady to 19 points, you should give yourselves an opportunity to be successful, but certainly with an inept offense. And so I think there's enough blame to go around between the quarterback, the receivers, the offensive coordinator, the head coach, and even Jerry. There's enough blame to go around for just a pathetic performance all around for the Cowboys.
Yeah, absolutely. And going back to Pollard missing the block that injured Dak Prescott, we've always talked about the greatest running backs of all time. Well, one of them was Walter Payton. And Walter Payton's one of his best attributes was that he could pick up that blitz. And you need to find players that do that. In today's game, they are not as technically sound as the players 20, 30, 40 years ago. And that just showed how bad, how evident that was.
Absolutely. But like I say, one of the best running backs in pass protection is on their team, number 21, Ezekiel Elliott. And there was a big drop off between he and Pollard. And I know there are things that Pollard does that you want to get him in the game. But pass protection is certainly he's got to get better at. So I think we're probably
Absolutely.
at the bottom of our hour. And we're going to be in a position where we're probably going to take a break for just a second, and then when we come back, we'll be able to talk a little bit more NFL, a little bit of college football, a little bit of baseball, and then work our way toward Penny for your thoughts.
So real quick before the break, Chiefs or Chargers?
Chiefs at home.
Chiefs at home too. All right. I'm going to walk outside for a moment.
Kansas City's global internet radio, KUAW. You are listening to Any Given Sunday. Myself, Darwin Penny, Coach 24, my co-host, the awesome voice, Brian Crest, under the engineering of DJ Scatter, Mr. George Walker. For all of you who are following us on Facebook and Twitter and any other platform, we welcome you back to Any Given Sunday. Brian, as we start our second half, I want to talk a little bit about college football and some of the upsets that were out there in the last week. We saw some mid-majors go into Power Five conferences and win games. We saw Texas A&M lose in an unseasonable fashion, and just some of your thoughts on college football. And is there a shift in power, or were these just some fluke opportunities that were manifest on any given Saturday?
Well, I think a little bit is any given Saturday. I think Alabama really underestimated Texas, and Texas showed up. Now, saying that, they're not a mid-major, but Appalachian State beating Texas A&M, and they have been doing that for the last 5 to 10 years, where these mid-major teams have been beaten big Power 5 conference teams. I think with the change of paying players and everything else, I think that has really started, because now players used to be, hey, you're playing for a scholarship, you're playing for the school, and a lot of them now are getting paid, so they could be acting like they're just playing for themselves. So that puts a little bit of pressure on. Saying that, I still think the dominance of college football is still roughly the same. Yes, Alabama struggled with a 1-point victory, but at the end of the season, at the end of the day, Alabama will be fighting for the national title, and so will Georgia. Now, who the other teams could be, Ohio State is probably the best bet as number 3, but it would take a lot more upsets for the change of the dynamics of college football to happen that way.
Absolutely. I expected Alabama to beat Texas. It was a little bit closer than I thought. Certainly, if Texas could have made a few more plays, and they were playing at home, where there's 100,000 fans in DK Royal Memorial Stadium, and it came down, basically to the last play, and so they had an opportunity to win. I certainly think that with Texas moving over to the SEC, that's going to be something that'll be a little bit more common, and so they had a lot to prove. Texas has, a new coach in Sarkisian, who coached under Nick Saban, and so did he have some of the nuances that Nick and his team like to do? Alabama's probably down on receivers this year. They've been sending receivers to the NFL, like IHOP serving pancakes. So they've had a lot of success at the receiver level, and so but this year they haven't really found that guy. So they're going to have to rely on their quarterback and their defense. They lost some guys, and they were young. I think Alabama, from being real dominant, Alabama is probably another year away from where they were. So, but that said, how about Marshall going into and beating Notre Dame, and cries of "We Are Marshall," the movie, evoked out of that upset, going in there. Number 21 BYU beating Baylor in who's ninth ranked in overtime. So that was another huge game where somebody goes in. Kentucky, even though they're ranked, went into Florida and beat the Gators. And so, when you look, there's always balance in the SEC. Certainly 2 teams, Georgia and Alabama, stick out. But to see some of these other teams going in, and we're not afraid of you anymore, and some of these kids are making decisions at where they go to school, with that little bit of a chip on their shoulder. Tennessee was ranked lower than Pitt and beat them by a touchdown, but certainly Marshall going in and beating a Notre Dame is something that you only most of the time see in a movie.
Right, absolutely. And here's the thing. And yes, it's early in the season, but you've got a KU team 2-0, and you've got a Notre Dame team 0-2. How rare does that ever happen? Like, never happens. And I'm talking about 150 years of football, and you just sometimes have to shake your head and wonder what the heck happened. So I think Notre Dame will be fine, providing that they don't keep losing, because Notre Dame has always been that powerhouse. Even though they've always been an independent, they've never had a conference that they joined in. I mean, I guess you could say the closest is the Big Ten. But saying that, they've always been on their own and they've always been able to succeed. If it doesn't work out very well this year and possibly even next year, it could put them in a lot of trouble.
Absolutely. Notre Dame is trying to get back to where its proud tradition once was. They've gone through some coaching changes. Obviously, they lost their coach who Kelly left to go to LSU and to take a stab at trying to be similar to Nick Saban, and I'm going to be able to win at multiple campuses. But certainly nobody has done it quite like Nick has. And so, I think that is interesting. You see, I know the Kansas fans are all excited. For the first time in a long time, they're off to two wins, regardless of who those wins were over. They're wins, and so because there's been years where Kansas didn't have 2 wins the whole season, and so I think that's something to be said for them at trying to get it turned. And this year, I don't think there is a dominant team in the Big 12, right? Certainly, Oklahoma will be good, but they're probably not as good as they were last year. The Cowboys at Oklahoma State have a lot to prove. They got to the Big 12 championship game last year, and so they've got a veteran team. Mike Gundy is one of the longest tenured coaches in college football, and so he's set a culture there that I think is pretty good. I do think Texas will be better. I don't think they'll be 5-7 this year. I think they should be a 9 or a 10 win team. Baylor has something pretty good going there. TCU had 1 win over a 1AA opponent, and so I think West Virginia will probably be down when we're talking about the Big 12. So I think this is a year that, who knows, maybe if they get 3 or 4 wins under their belt and get some confidence going, then maybe the Jayhawks can actually not only compete, but actually be bowl eligible.
Well, and in a few years, the playoffs are going to expand. Instead of just 4 teams, it's going to expand to 12 teams. So it's going to give these teams that are 10-2, I guess 11-2, 12-1. These one-loss teams, even some of the mid-major undefeated teams, will give them a chance to get in the playoffs. Though it's still a few years away, but you are at least working up to that, and you have to get your teams completely ready, because if you do not have them ready, you're just going to fail just like you're doing now.
Absolutely. We want to be able to see a team in that playoff like we saw with Cincinnati last year, coming out of the American Athletic Conference. And then certainly, Clemson has had some success coming out of the ACC, Notre Dame being in last year as that independent. But now you could actually lose your conference championship. And if you've had a really, really good season, you're not penalized once they expand to 12. I was really hoping that they would expand it to 16. 16 has always been a good number for me. The 1AA playoffs and the Division II and the Division III playoffs have always centered around 16 teams, the top 16 ranked teams, and giving those teams an opportunity to go out and compete in a win or go home type format. And so I think that's something that's going to be important as we go moving forward to that. And so with that said, I'm going to kind of pivot a little bit from our football and talk a little bit about baseball. First thing I want to talk about is Aaron Judge. Aaron Judge hit 2 more home runs, and so now is sitting at 57 home runs and has a chance to break a record. Probably not the record of Barry Bonds' 73 single season record, but certainly have the opportunity to set the American League record, which I think is little known to people. It still stands, the 61 that Roger Maris hit. And in 61, and then Babe Ruth, he has a chance to break Babe Ruth's standing Yankee record if he were to hit 3 more home runs, and with that, he's had an outstanding season. Would you consider him the front runner for the MVP this year?
You have to. I mean, he's hitting all those home runs. He could break an American League record that you and I were not even born when it happened. You have to, but you also have to look at Ohtani's and what he has done. Now, the favor for Aaron Judge is the fact that he's playing for the Yankees, and the Yankees are playing for a playoff. They are still in first place, though they have really struggled since the All-Star break. But you've got Ohtani that's playing on a team kind of similar to Andre Dawson in 1987 when he won the MVP on the Chicago Cubs, and they were a last-place team. It could go either way, but I think in that because of what Aaron Judge is doing, he will get, and especially if he ends up hitting at least 4 more home runs and 5 to break the American League record. If he does that, then yes, he is the MVP. Plus, he has a great shot at making the Triple Crown because he leads in RBIs, he leads in home runs, and he's roughly like 9 points behind the first place hitter in the American League. So, if he definitely does that and breaks the record, how can you not say he is the MVP?
Yeah. Just the uniqueness that we have with Ohtani being able to do it both not only in the at the plate but on the mound, and that is something unique that we haven't seen in centuries. And so I think he but I would, if I had a vote today, certainly Aaron Judge would be it because of just his consistency throughout the year. He has been a huge factor in the Yankees and their offense. Like you said, they had a huge lead and it's dwindled. But at the end of the day, if you set and break a record that has stood for roughly 5 decades, I think that should count for something when it comes to MVP race as well. And I think there's one guy on the outside looking in playing on a winning team that even comes into that, but I don't think he's anywhere near those guys, which would be Altuve. Altuve is quietly having another solid year in leading the Astros, who will be a force to be reckoned with in come the playoffs. I think in the National League, Paul Goldschmidt of the Cardinals, who I happen to always affectionately say is the second best player to ever play baseball at Texas State University, with yours truly being number 1.
Absolutely.
But he is having a near triple crown year. He is with home runs and RBIs. He's leading with RBIs and he's leading actually with average. And so I think he's the front runner there with Nolan Arenado and Mookie Betts, respectively being second and third. Arenado has had a really good year, but certainly not to the level of Goldschmidt. He showed a level of consistency, and he likely will win another Gold Glove this year. We talk about all the offensive firepower that these guys have, but he's really, really good defensively, and certainly I think Mookie has a chance to win another Gold Glove in right field for the Dodgers as well. And so it should be a pretty good close race. But if I had a vote in the National League, Paul Goldschmidt of the St. Louis Cardinals would be the MVP.
I would say the same thing, but the only reason why I would pick Mookie Betts over Goldsmith is because the way the Dodgers have just completely have dominated
Yes.
the National League. I mean, you got the Padres, who are a decent team and more than likely a playoff team, and they are 20 games ahead of them. So, I mean, it just shows how the Dodgers are just totally are outclassing everybody else. Let's just see how they handle it when they do make it to the postseason.
Yeah, and then I think some of your when you get to this MVP voting, they'll put some of these expanded metrics in there. And so when you talk about WAR, wins above replacement, Paul Goldschmidt is leading that. He's slightly ahead of Arenado. He is definitely leading. In on base percentage. When you're talking about extended, he is over 400 on base percentage. He's also leading the league in slugging percentage, and he's leading the league in OPS. Those are the things that I think when they start voting, they're going to pull out some of these advanced metrics, and I think those are the things that are going to be huge in his favor. Even total bases, he's leading the league in total bases. He's 2 behind Kyle Schwarber in home runs, and then he's 2 RBIs behind Pete Alonso when it comes to that statistic. And then when it comes to batting average, he's he's 5 points behind Freddie Freeman. So he's got a chance to win the Triple Crown, but even beyond the Triple Crown, he could lead probably 8 different categories in the National League, and I think that's going to be hard to overlook when it comes to MVP voting.
Absolutely. Now we're gonna cut to because today was Roberto Clemente Day, and Roberto Clemente, I mean, you can't say enough of what he was as a player and a humanitarian and everything else. But there was a record that happened today that has never happened in the history of baseball, and that was in Toronto, where the Tampa Bay Rays played 9 starters that were all from Latin America, and that to me shows the progress that baseball is doing a little bit, and it's a way to honor Roberto Clemente Day.
Absolutely. I think that's progress for a day, but I'm going to be the opponent that we have not made progress as much as we should for a whole. You go back to September of 1971 when Clemente was a part of the Pittsburgh Pirates, and they started the first all non-white lineup with Rennie Stennett at second base, Gene Clines in center field, Clemente was in right field, Stargell in left, Manny Sanguin the catcher, Dave Cash at third base, Al Oliver at first base, and Jackie Hernandez was the shortstop. So you had 3 Latin Americans and you had 6 African Americans in the lineup on that particular day. But when we look at Major League Baseball as a whole, okay, we have less than 100 African Americans in Major League Baseball. We have made a significant movement in the Latin community, non-American born Latin players, where there's nearly 30% at the major league level. And so when you look at it as a whole, when you say how much progress have we made as far as minorities, we'll say, yeah, we've made some progress, but here's what I know, that it's not going to get much better because of the way amateur baseball is set up currently. And so it's something, as you know, as my friend, that I'm very, very passionate about. not only what we do on the field, but the things that we do in the front office. Those things are all very, very important to me from a Major League Baseball stance. But today is a day about celebrating Clemente, and more than that, he gave the ultimate sacrifice in doing for others. Taking goods and supplies in a plane to Nicaragua where he lost his life. But when you look at those who were nominated for the Roberto Clemente Award, in particular, our own Nicky Lopez here in Kansas City, more than half of the players that were nominated for doing community service and making an impact in their respective communities where they play, more than half of those are minority players. And it's impressive to me to see guys like Dylan Tate, Byron Buxton, Jason Hayward, Tony Kemp, Tristan McKenzie, who are all African American players who have been nominated by their respective teams to be able to go into communities. Paul Goldschmidt, who we talked about earlier, is the nominee for St. Louis, and he's always been. And then Jose Altuve is actually the one for Houston, and then Taylor Hearn, an African American, is the nominee for the Texas Rangers.
Absolutely. Now, I know that we're pressed up against time, but we cannot forget Penny for Your Thoughts. And so, Coach 24, what are your Penny for Your Thoughts?
Penny for Your Thoughts today is certainly a little bit non-baseball related, but certainly related to the world as a whole, and then its impact on sport. We lost Queen Elizabeth II, who had been the Queen of England, a 70-year reign. Well, I liken that 70-year reign as right along the same time as we were starting to go through a diverse time here in the United States. 75 years ago, Jackie Robinson broke the color barrier. And so she broke a barrier of a queen being on the throne for longer than any monarch in England's history. And so we celebrate that along with the diversity that the Clemente Award brings, and Roberto and what he gave. And then when we look at Jackie gave of himself. And so when we look at Penny for Your Thoughts, we're talking about people who are givers by nature, and people who have given not only their time, their talent, but their resources, and left a lasting legacy, especially in the world of sport. And so though she was not one who was an athlete, she certainly supported sport in England, and England's huge impact that it's had in the golf world, that it's had in the soccer world, and certainly in the Olympics at what they've been able to do. And so with that, we want to say and just have a little bit of a salute to the Queen as she takes her final rest here in the next couple of days, and to all those who have been selected to be representatives of their respective teams for the Clemente Award. We salute them for giving themselves. And then I'll always salute Jackie Robinson for being the first to go out and pave a way for so many of us to have an opportunity to play.
Absolutely. And so with that, in another phenomenal show that we have. So I'm going to let you finish up, and thank you for allowing me to come on and talk while I was in Vegas. So we definitely had a great show today.
Absolutely, man. It's always my pleasure to be with you. Looking forward to you getting back here safely until we do what we do out on the golf course and everything else. And to all our friends who have followed us today, we appreciate you just sticking around with a couple of old fellas who like to talk about even any given Sunday. And one of the things that Brian always talks about, he talks about not being angry, but be awesome. And so with that, we're going to say a pleasant good night. Go Chiefs, go Royals. And little known fact, the Kansas City Monarchs are playing a playoff game tonight over at Legends Field. When I leave here, that's where I'm headed to go over and scout those guys. And so it's a great day in Kansas City. With that,
absolute.
We are out.
Let you finish. You go for it.
All right. All right. Thank you again to Mr. Walker, and everybody have a great and safe evening.
Good night, everyone.